Hello there, Romans here and welcome to my next music review. Today it's going to be Asking Alexandria and their self-titled album.
Music review. Music review.
Asking Alexandria is a band that I've been listening to something like 2.5 years ago. That's when I went through their first 3 albums. And they were pretty famous because metalcore is not necessarily a genre that I listen to frequently, or a genre where I tried to discover way too many bands. But Asking Alexandria was one of those bands that I kind of discovered and got interested in, along with, for example, Bullet for My Valentine, Bring Me the Horizon, or Ansu Shikari. And one thing that really made Asking Alexandria different from majority of the bands, because I do believe that majority of bands playing metalcore do sound the same. There are very little changes, but Asking Alexandria was doing something pretty interesting on their first 2 albums, and that was that they were combining electronica and almost techno elements with their music, which also resulted in their music genre being labeled as electrocore. And their first 2 albums were pretty extreme, and it was their 3rd album, From Death to Eternity, where it seemed like they ventured more into a territory of hard rock music combined with some metalcore elements. They were pretty reminiscent of Stone Sour at that point. And after the 3rd album, the singer Danny left the group, and based on the project, I think Charlotte the Harlot or something like that, he wanted to do more straightforward, simple and relatively melodic rock music. And they had a replacement as a singer, and a year ago they released a record called, I think, The Black, which is the album I haven't listened to, but based on what I've heard about that album, they were pretty happy about it, I mean the band, because it seemed like they've returned to their roots and they yet again made a record that was more heavy and more based on what made them famous in the first place. And now, a year later, Asking Alexandria are back with another record, which is a self-titled album. Every time a band releases a self-titled album, it's always something to make you think, is this going to be something special? Usually self-titled records are the first records from the bands when they don't know how to call it, but when they do it somewhere in the middle of their career, it's a pretty interesting move. So I've heard the new album 5 times already. It's coming out 15th of December 2017, so let's look at this record. So the very first song I've heard from this album was a single called Into the Fire, which is really a fantastic song. It's one of the best songs in this genre I've ever heard. It got that techno-like gent riff, and then you've got almost like a pop tune, and somewhere in the middle you've got a metalcore section that will kind of remind you what kind of band Asking Alexandria was before. And this is a very good kind of like balance between heavy and melodic. I think that this song is pretty accessible even for people who may not necessarily listen to metalcore at all. So apart from Into the Fire, there are also other heavy tracks on the album, like for example I Am the One or When the Lights Come Up, which is also like this electro pop rock kind of tune, but then when the chorus kicks in you will immediately remember the band Skillet. And then you've got, for example, the song Rise Up, also one of the heavier tracks, but that's pretty much it. The rest of the album pretty much goes in the vein of kind of like pop rock mixed with some electronics. And interesting thing is that probably even upon the first listening you will realize that there are, apart from Into the Fire, there are no riffs and there are no guitar solos. It seems like what may be different from previous albums is that all the instruments that are actually in the band, so the guitars, the bass, drums, they seem to be just like some kind of a background music, and there is a much bigger focus on some ambient stuff and ambient parts and some drones and textures. Many times they reminded me of, for example, the band Taiho, which is very famous for playing this kind of ambient music, and also, for example, some soundtracks like Deus Ex Human Revolution, which is a computer game, and the soundtrack has exactly those kind of sounds that you can find on this record. Even the song Rise Up, which is a pretty heavy song, has some electronic moments that reminded me of the first album from Ellie Goulding. So as I said, the rest of the tracks are pretty much a traditional, like, modern pop rock, Alone in the Room or Hopelessly Hopeful, and it kind of reminded me of the last album Bring Me the Horizon made, called That's the Spirit, which was also a big shift from what they did before, because even Sempiternal from Bring Me the Horizon was a pretty heavy and pretty metalcore album, and suddenly they released That's the Spirit, which was a very melodic album, almost pop-like. There was almost no screaming, and it seemed like they kind of like Linkin Parked. And the same thing I got here. It's a very reminiscent of for example, Linkin Park and their more commercial stuff, or even of 30 Seconds to Mars at times, if they played a little heavier music. The song Where Did It Go kind of sounds like Stone Sour meets Ed Sheeran because of some parts where the singer raps a little bit. Probably the biggest pop tune on the album is a song called Empire, where they have a featuring from a rapper called Binks. I've never heard of him. This is as pop as the record gets. It's a song I can actually imagine on radios. The only song that kind of stands out from a production point of view is Vultures, as that song is played on an acoustic guitar, and therefore it has slightly old school but also a very different feeling than all the other songs. When it comes to the production, I think that the whole album has a very modern and very crystal clear production, but also very cold and very sterile, in my opinion, because I think that's the reason of overcompression. That's the trend right now. You have loudness war, so the bands try to be very loud, even for the price of losing some dynamics, and there are no dynamics on the record whatsoever. Anytime you will feel like there's a little hint of a dynamics is when the instruments stop playing and you hear only those ambient parts, but apart from that, the record is pretty much like one steady thing going on. So I think that the biggest question I have about this album is that it's really very, very, very different, and I'm not really sure how fans will accept this record, because there are very few moments where Asking Alexandria can be labeled as a metal band. Much more often I would call them probably hard rock or maybe even pop rock band, and I'm not sure if this is something that metalcore fans will appreciate. But apart from all the criticism I had, I think that this is a pretty enjoyable record. I actually really like all the sounds. Sonically, it's a very colorful record, which means that with the repeated listenings you will find many things hidden in between the songs. And I also must say that Danny as a vocalist is just amazing. He's got a really great voice. Of course, I think that the production is a little bit problematic, because what you hear on the album, they will never sound like that live, because it's simply not possible to transform that sound on the stage. Not that it's important, just saying. I decided to give this record 8 points out of 10. I think that this is a very enjoyable record. So, Asking Alexandria, as the record has the same name as the band, in Slovak means Pýtať sa Alexandrie. That's it for me. I hope you liked this, hopefully short review. If you did, don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe, and you can follow me on Instagram or on Facebook. You can find links to both of these in the comment section below, in the description of the video below. If you share the same opinion as me, or if you disagree, you can let me know in the comment section below. If there are any bloopers, you can enjoy them at the end, and thanks for watching, I guess. Już natáčalo.
Action.